So this project is sort of an extension of one of our other videos, which is creating a Ukiyo-e woodblock print. So this is the next step, which is we're going to be creating a screen print inspired by some traditional prints. So what I did is I'm sort of interested in creating a screen print using the samurai as my subject. So I've gone through and pulled some reference photos that I'm into, and I'm going to adapt some of these and sort of morph them together. And that's what I'm having the students do as well. So they're going to pick out some images, and that's what they're going to work with. Anytime I start to sort of form these ideas in my head based off of traditional work, I take a sheet of paper, I start by folding it in force, give myself some area to make some thumbnails. So far for thumbnails, what I've made is, and this is the one I'm sort of drawn to the most, that's what I started with, sketching out what that would look like. This one is with a staff. I thought, what if I did a close-up? And then I was really into sort of this headpiece and some of the intricacy of that. So then I ended up combining that into one with that original one. So that's where my headspace was at in creating these. So I always like to do thumbnails because as I went, I started to find things I liked within other work, and it ended up coming back to a similar design as the original one that influenced my work. But it taught me a lot about what I wanted my final to look like. After that, we move right into the sketch of the final. So I started sketching this out and getting some of the lines where they were. So in a screen print, there can't be value. So we're gonna end up making this all line work. So it either has to be colored in fully black or left white, so two-tone. There is ways you can make value through stippling and some other stuff, which we'll talk about in a different video. But for now, we're just doing a line drawing. So I'm gonna go through each of these areas now and start to add in what I want the actual lines to look like. Like this part of the cuff is going to be darker, and it's going to come across here, sink down, and come up. So really all I'm going to do for the next little part of this is crisp up some of these lines, and then I'm going to go through with the fine point Sharpie, fix them up, and then start adding the pattern work. A lot of the pattern work I want to pull from actual Ukiyo-e prints. So I've got a lot of reference images of the different types of design and pattern work. Like I really enjoy this one here, so I'm going to try to pull that into it. So that's sort of where we're at on this next phase. So I'm going to create the drawing that we're going to base everything off of, and then I'll show you how to bring it into the actual screen with photo emulsion. So now that I have the drawing complete, the next phase is going to be taking the Sharpie. I'm going to go through and crisp up the lines using this and start adding some of the design work. So I'll fast forward through this part, but basically just going through and starting to give myself the actual line. And I'm going to make it a little bit thicker so that the ink can squeeze through on these. So going through and making it a double wide line is going to help when I actually go to make the screen print. So I've gone through and used Sharpie to outline all the different areas. I started adding some stylizations. As I did this, I started to realize, adding too many things in there was starting to get too much. So you know what they say, sometimes less is more. So I ended up only doing a couple of stylizations here on the darker areas, and then a couple just blended in because you don't want to overdo it. So I actually ended up tracing this from the original one so that all the pencil lines were gone, so that was nice and clean. So the next step would be taking a transparency and placing this on top and going through and starting to trace the whole thing. So I would do the same exact process now that I have the design I want onto this transparency so that we can do the photo emulsion with the screen. So what we found after doing this a few years is usually one just is not enough. So it's hard to see on the camera, but it's slightly transparent. So you end up with some lighter areas. So after you trace it on here, you actually have to flip it over and trace again so you get 2 layers of Sharpie. That's a lot of work. So it takes quite a bit of glasses to get this perfect and to come out strong. The other option, which is the option I chose because I also want to change the size, was to take this, scan it, and then bring it into Photoshop and print it right onto the transparency. So I printed this onto a transparency. I then printed it twice. So you want it to be a really strong black so it blocks out the light. So this is actually 2 transparencies doubled up on top of each other, so it's really solid black. And then I was also able to adjust the size and make it bigger. So maybe that's the lazy way out of this, but it does save a lot of time. And it's up to you how you'd want to do that, if you want to do it by hand or bring it through and send it through a laser printer. So I now have, for my original thumbnails and drawings, the transparency, which is going to be used to actually make the screen. Before you do this, you just want to look it over and make sure that everything that is darked out is in fact where you want the ink to go, and then anything that is the transparency, that would be the t-shirt color or what will stay. And then we'll bring you to the next step, which is mixing up the photo emulsion and applying that to the screen.
Go.
So this is the photo emulsion that we're using. This is the Jacquard brand. Every brand has its own measurements, so make sure you read the label when you go through. But this comes as a kit, so it has the photo emulsion as well as the diazo. So for this particular one, the diazo, you just have to fill this up about halfway with some water. Doesn't really matter if it's hot or cold. It's hard to tell if it's actually halfway. And you mix it up so that this chemical spreads throughout the water. And then you're going to open up the photo emulsion. Now you should wait about 2 hours before you use any of this, so it has time to set. So I'm making this beforehand. So this pours into it, and to mix it, I'm just using a regular palette knife, but it doesn't really matter what you're mixing with. So it's going to turn from blue and get like a tealish color. So we're going to mix this up. We're going to let set for about 2 hours, and then I'll show you the applying onto the screen. And you want to keep this in a dark, cool place. And the shelf life varies depending on temperature, but I usually let mine go for about like 2 weeks to a month, and then after that it starts to get a little goopy, and that doesn't work as well. So you want to mix it up when you're ready to do a bunch of these, because it doesn't last super long. I'll add it all together once I'm ready. Okay, so now that our photo emulsion has been sitting for about 2 hours, and this just sat overnight, so anything over 2 hours is good, it's time to apply it. So we're in the back room of my classroom, which we use as our dark room. So there's a safe light, which you can buy pretty much anywhere online that sells photo equipment. And I've got my screen. So this is a 420 exposure time, and it's a 220 mesh. They come in different variances, but that's usually the standard. So I'm gonna take the photo emulsion. You can use a palette knife, or you can apply it directly to the screen. It does get pretty messy and it does wash off, but if you wanted to use gloves, a couple of my students will ask for those as we go through this. I have mini squeegees. If you don't have these, a credit card works really good, like a Shoppers Club card. And then basically we're just applying and pushing this through the mesh all the way across. When you run out, you just apply some more. So this is eventually all going to get scooped back into here once I'm done. So you want a nice thin layer through every part. This specific screen, the mesh has some plastic around. So this is like a taped plastic that lets you go right to the edge and off of it. Not every one of the screens have that. So usually I'll use like a clear plastic tape when I go to print, because this won't get all the way from edge to edge. So once I get it into all the screen, I start pulling off the ink and just putting it back into the bottle so it can be reused again. I'm getting a nice even coat all the way through. And then I'm going to flip the screen and do the same exact thing on the back side, because if you've done this correctly, it's going to force a lot of the chemical onto the other side. So we want to make sure that you're cleaning both sides to get that thin layer. if it's too thick, it doesn't dry appropriately, and it ends up ruining the screen when you go to exposure it. So you want it to be really uniform all the way across. After I do the back side, I flip it over again. And then it's sort of a game of just keep going back and forth until you know you've just got one really clean, good layer. So you can see it doesn't take a lot of the photo emulsion to make one screen. So this bottle will usually do like a whole class. Alright, it looks like I probably need just one more time and then we should be good. And if you're worried about the direction, it doesn't matter which direction you go. You can go horizontal or vertical or both. I just like going the long way because it's quicker. Alright, one more. Alright, so this will be the last one, and then we'll just hold it up to the light to double check. So it's probably hard to see on the camera, but if you look, it's got a clear coat through there. You can see there's a couple areas like that would be a problem when you're printing. So you want to make sure to get rid of that. It looks like it's on the back side. So before this goes to dry, just go through and fix any areas like that. So you can see I make the mark. You can watch it go through. So you can actually hold it up to the light and see any of the areas that are causing you problems. After that, when it goes to dry, I put it into a cupboard just so it stays out of the light. You don't want this to be airtight, so you want air to get in there so that it can actually dry. And then usually it just takes overnight and then it's all set to be used the next day. And then we'll go over the exposure unit, which is the next step. All right, so now we're at the exposure unit. This is one that I purchased. It can technically be done using the sun. It could also be done just using a normal light. Anything works for it, you just have to test it. So what I mean by that is I would place this, I would put down a piece of screen with the photo emulsion I used and clock how long it takes for this exposure unit to work. So I've done enough tests on here that I know it takes 4 minutes and 20 seconds to give me the perfect amount. So I'm going to start by placing out my print and turn this off, pull out the screen that I've already applied the photo emulsion. It's had time to dry. Making sure this is placed in the center. This does not have to be reversed. So that's usually a common mistake. Because we're applying the screen to t-shirt just like this, we want it that way. And then you want to put down something to apply a little pressure. So I put down 2 different heavier things with the foam so that it ends up being really tight to the screen and the plastic so that it doesn't get fuzzy. So if it's flapping up or it's not really tight to each other, it can create a fuzzy outline, which we don't want. Next, I'm going to apply this and start it for 4 minutes and 20 seconds. After that, you turn it off and then you immediately put it under the hot water to clean it out, which I'll show you next. So we're going to start 4 minutes and 20 seconds now, and then I'll take you to the next clip where we're washing it out. Okay, so it's been 4:20 and you can see that the image has successfully burned in. The second you put this in water, the exposure to the UV ray or the sun stops. So it's important just after the 4 minutes and 20 seconds to get it right into the water so it can stop the process. It shouldn't be very difficult to get all this off. So I'm starting by sort of just letting it sit in there for a second, start to break up the chemicals, letting the water run on it. In case I didn't explain this already, the point of all of this is the photo emulsion creates a UV sensitive layer inside the mesh, and when it is exposed to the light, it hardens and it blocks out the screen. So the point of making that black outline is that it blocks that area from being exposed to the light, and that's how you get those see-through areas. So as it starts to wash off, you can see it's starting to come out of those areas. So I'm sort of letting some of this happen naturally. If you have the right facility, there would be basically a hose that you could spray and make this go a lot faster. So you can see when I apply pressure using the sink, it starts to come out on its own. What you don't want to do, and I only do this when the exposure time is pretty off, is take something like one of the green scrubbers and go at the surface of this because it can actually rip off the hardening chemical too. So if you did this right and you have the exact time and the exact layer, it should start to come off as easy as this. Sometimes it takes a little light scrubbing. Like I said, I really don't like to do that because it can ruin the rest of the screen. And it does help to go from both sides. You can switch sides and force this out either way. And the closer you get to where the stream is coming from, the more force it sends out. So in extreme cases, I'll hold it like right next to it and push it out that way. So it's almost got all of it here. You can take your hand and lightly do that. Be careful not to press down too hard. And sometimes some of the smaller stuff just doesn't come out. So the light snuck through a little bit into certain areas. So you can see these smaller lines are taking a lot more pressure, time, and water out. Same with the dots. So that happens with a lot of the smaller lines. So I've had kids who make an entire screen and they end up not having half of it come out because the lines just aren't strong enough or dark enough. So that was one of the reasons why I was showing that Sharpie part of this video. I went through and I did a lot of pressure and doubling up the lines. All right, so that's the general gist of it. So you can see it's now see-through through those parts. There's a couple spots I still need to get out, but I'm gonna pause the video for that and just finish it up. After that, this has to dry. So it's gonna dry overnight, and then we're gonna start the printing part in the next phase, which we'll do on both paper and the t-shirt. Okay, so the next step in this process is we're going to be printing. We've got our screen print, which is now dry. So I actually did this morning, so it ended up drying. Usually I leave them overnight, but dried fairly quick. So as you can see through the screen, so the parts that were done in Sharpie, it's see-through, where the ink is going to spread through, whereas the rest of the photo emulsion is hardened from the light. So the side we're going to be applying the ink to is the side that has the frame. So the flat side is down. We've got, I'm just using some regular fabric paint because we're going to be doing this on a shirt. So we're going to do our test run on paper and then do it on the shirt after. And then I've got my squeegee, which is to push the ink through, and just a palette knife to apply it. So I'm going to start by opening this up and applying some of this ink right to the surface of the mesh. I'm gonna try to save as much of this as we can. And this jar will last me like almost the entire year for all my students. It goes a long way because all it takes is that thin layer. So you actually get a lot out of these size jars. Over there. Okay, so we're going to put this up at an angle. I'm gonna take some of the ink, and you basically just apply it to the side because it's gonna get dragged across with the squeegee. And this is one of those situations where you want to have a lot because you don't want to run out. So it's better to have more on here than not enough. And we're going to find out if it was enough in a minute. Okay, so we're going to set that aside. Then you're going to take the squeegee, and then you're going to do a run down. You can see it is now coated everything. And then we're going to apply it to the paper. And then taking the squeegee, we're going to go the opposite direction. And press it onto the paper. And pull our print out. All right, so I think that looks pretty good. That's how we want it. So I'm going to now move on to the t-shirt. So this has to get set aside. Careful not to let it touch the table. Notice I've got a piece of paper down too. This gets pretty messy. I want this to be flat as possible here. And then we're going to do the same process. And sometimes you can get a couple runs out of the ink that's already on the squeegee. So there's a lot of ink currently on the squeegee here. So I could probably get an extra run out of it. All right, so once again, all the parts have some coating on it. Oh, we missed a little bit right there. Anytime you miss some, you just sort of throw more on there. I'm gonna try to center this as best as I can, which is half the battle. And then remember, lots of pressure pressing down. Go across. Make sure I got everywhere. And pull up. So there's an entire print. Hold this up with the camera so you can see it better. And then this doesn't take very long to dry. I'm just gonna let it set out here. Again, overnight. It's just turning into like a week process with all these overnights. And that's just your single color print. So if I wanted to do this with multiple colors, I would then have to make another screen print that has maybe just the outfit done in Sharpie. I would make the photo emulsion work so that it was only eaten out of those areas. So that would be the black part, and then you would apply it one after the other. So that's how you make the multiple colors, which is a story for a different day. So that's the basics of how to do the entire process from start to finish. So hope it goes well, and good luck.